Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. As you all know, there are many tragic characters in Baldur's Gate 3, but to me, none of them feel as quietly cruel as Karlach. From the moment that you meet her, she radiates warmth and a desperate love for life, yet everything about her existence is defined by a future that she is never able to have. It's clear to all of us from the onset that she isn't chasing power, but she's chasing time. And the game takes us all through a heartfelt journey, giving us hope that we might be able to help her claim back her future. But beneath every victory, every laugh, and every fleeting moment of hope, there's a tragedy that the story never lets her escape. Just quickly, if you enjoy this type of content, please consider subbing to the channel and dropping a like. And without further ado, let's get right into it. In many ways, before we even meet Karlach, her life is already over. And I don't just mean this in a dramatic sense or in a metaphorical way, but instead in the quiet and mechanical certainty that's been ticking down for 10 years. Karlach didn't fall into Avernus chasing some sort of power or making a pact with the devil, but she was sold. Enver Gortash handed her over to Zerial as simply a commodity, just a weapon to be exploited by the hellish forces that needed her. And to me, that single betrayal is the event that fractures every version of her future before it even has a chance to exist. When you talk to Karlach, she'll tell you exactly what happened to her, that she was taken to Avernus and forcibly outfitted with an infernal engine in place of her heart. And this engine turned her simply into a machine that was meant to be kept alive only as long as she remained useful in the Blood War. As you all know, her engine burns too hot for her to comfortably exist in the material plane, and it's clear that she was never supposed to return from the depths of hell. Where in Avernus she could endure the pain of the engine, in Faerun it's slowly killing her. Of course, I think it's obvious that this is not something that the narrative ever tries to hide or soften, but instead the game makes it clear that Karlach's death is already written into her body. But to me, what makes this loss all the more devastating is that it's not only about physical damage, but about the life that she was never able to live in the first place. Karlach talks to you a few times about her childhood in Baldur's Gate, and how she dreamed of a future that she didn't yet know would be stolen. She never longed for glory or for power, but she wanted ordinary things. To laugh, to fall in love, to feel the world without it burning her alive. But all of these dreams are taken from her time and time again. The engine doesn't allow her to safely touch another person without burning them. You of course see this in her early inability to give you a hug, or how she flinches from even simple closeness to you or other companions. The cruelty of this all is that it isn't subtle in any way. I think all of us can agree that Karlach is the most affectionate and expressive character in the entire game. She wants to hug people, to squeeze the life out of them in celebration, but the engine turns that natural instinct into a danger, where even joy becomes painful. Then there's Avernus itself. Karlach spends 10 years of her life fighting in literal hell, not as a general or as a rising devil, but as an expendable foot soldier in an endless war where death is routine and survival is temporary. She never romanticizes it, but she talks about its heat, the blood, and the fact that if she ever stopped moving for even a moment, she would die. There is no honor in her voice when she talks about the war, only desperation in clutching for survival. Yet I think what makes Karlach's tragedy even more significant is the fact that she never becomes overly cruel or spiteful because of it. She doesn't emerge from hell hardened into a person full of bitterness or hatred. Instead, she comes back with a longing to live, to feel the rain, to laugh. This is not in any way a heroic transformation, but it's a survival response to prolonged trauma and pain. And it makes what was taken from her feel even more unbearable. But as you know, the betrayal that placed her in that position is not abstract. It has a face. Gortash isn't just the new Archduke of Baldur's Gate, or one of the three chosen, but he's the man who trafficked Karlach's life into hell. So when we alongside Karlach finally stand in the same room as him again, there is no dramatic revenge fantasy unfolding before us. Instead, there is shock, rage, and the quiet disbelief of someone seeing the person who destroyed them now standing comfortably in power. The game doesn't give you a cathartic release when you first see Gortash, but it gives you a reminder of how cruelly small the distance can be between monsters and politicians. But even beyond this betrayal, the engine implanted into Karlach takes from her even the most basic future. Yeah, sure, the upgrades from Dammon help stabilize the engine temporarily, but me and you both know that this is not in any way a cure. It just slows the burn, buying time for Karlach instead of survival. And Karlach is well aware of this. She never deludes herself about it, and when she talks about wanting to live, it isn't framed as some sort of denial, but as defiance against what fate has written for her. To me, her defiance is not about refusing reality, but refusing to let let their reality define her present. And really, I think this is what makes what was taken from her feel so significant. It isn't just her heart, her body, or her future, but it's the right to live without negotiating with her own death every single day. Karlach is not tragic because she suffers, because as we're all aware, many characters in this game do. But Karlach is tragic because she was never given the chance to be anything other than a survivor. Before she even joined us as a companion on our journey, and before she ever became a hero of Baldur's Gate, she was just a resource, a weapon. And the game never lets you forget the life she lost wasn't one of legend or glory, it was just a normal one. For a lot of your journey through Baldur's Gate 3, the game lets you believe that Karlach's fate will be different. It doesn't ever deny the danger of her condition, but it steadily feeds you just enough possibilities to keep you even a little hopeful. Now, this isn't done through any sort of promise or grand prophecy, but it happens quietly through small victories and of the implication that surely in a world as vast and magical as Faerun, there must be a solution somewhere. Of course, the first real embodiment of this hope arrives through Dammon. When you first meet him in Act 1 among the tiefling refugees in the Emerald Grove, he quickly recognizes that the infernal engine in Karlach's chest is something that can be worked on. And what this does critically, early into the game, is reframe the problem, making you think of Karlach's condition as something mechanical and not some sort of incurable curse. It makes you think that this is something that can be adjusted, refined, or even repaired. And so when Dammon performs the first of his upgrades on Karlach's engine at the Emerald Grove, the result feels like it means something. Then by the time you reach Act 2 and encounter Dammon again at the Last Light Inn, the sense of progress deepens. This upgrade is easily the most significant of them all, as it allows Karlach to touch another person without burning them, and the game lets this moment breathe. It's framed as a genuine emotional release, and for Karlach it really is. This is the moment where the barrier that defined her isolation finally begins to crack. Dammon's language about the engine also gives you a sense of hope rather than inevitability. Now, he doesn't promise that a cure is possible outright, but his words imply something even more powerful than certainty, potential. And in a story like Baldur's Gate 3, potential is often indistinguishable from real hope. At the same time, the world of Faerun kind of reinforces this belief. As you journey across the vast landscapes of this beautiful game, you'll see that it is filled with technological wonders and arcane miracles. You defy gods and rewrite your destiny through sheer will. Against that backdrop, the idea that an infernal engine might be permanently fixable doesn't at all feel unreasonable. If we as the player have the power to overthrow an elder brain, what the hell is an infernal engine going to do? Karlach herself slowly bought into this hope, carefully but sincerely. You can hear it in the way she begins to talk about the possibility of having a future during Act 2 and into Act 3. She isn't talking about death with so much certainty anymore, but instead she talks about time and the life that could be waiting for her once this problem is solved. And as you see her optimism and the progress she seems to be making, you can't help but also feel optimistic. Every upgrade she gets reinforces the idea that progress is indeed being made, and that her struggle to survive might eventually turn into real freedom. And then Act 3 arrives. The city of Baldur's Gate is without a doubt the heart of invention, politics, and industry within the world of Faerun. It is the place where solutions live. So the game makes you believe that if there's going to be a cure for Karlach anywhere, this is where it most likely is. The city is full of engineers, Gondians, Steelwatch constructs, and forbidden research. And everything we've heard and seen about this place implies that it is the apex of technology within this world. For a while, the game encourages your hope. You see infernal engines being mass-produced through the Steel Watch, and you come into contact with the Gondians, a group of engineers who seem to specialize in the type of technology that mirrors Karlach's engine. Narratively, the pieces of all of this align too much for us to ignore, and it only seems imminent that a solution will be found. And yet I think it is here when the illusion begins to fracture. No matter how thoroughly you dismantle the Foundry, how many engineers you save, or how many devils and powerful figures you challenge, Karlach's engine just remains unchanged. There is no hidden upgrade or a late game breakthrough that suddenly revitalizes some sense of hope. The narrative doesn't reveal any true path forward, and instead all of the infrastructure that seems like it should offer salvation turns out to be completely irrelevant to her survival. Even the game begins to reinforce the truth. By Act 3, it's clear to us all that Karlach's condition begins to worsen again. The engine continues to overheat, and it becomes all too clear that you've just been buying time, not a cure. This, to me, is where the illusion of hope becomes its most cruel, because it's not only us who bought into the idea that a cure was possible, it's Karlach too. She began to gradually build an emotional future on the assumption that she might again be able to live a normal life, but of course the truth reassessed itself. By the latest parts of Act 3, Karlach openly acknowledges what's happening to her. I think the most clear example of this is her outburst after you kill Gortash. It's here after holding it in for so long that she lashes out at you, the world, and everything that she's been through. She's tired of running, of bargaining, and of pretending that the answer was just one step away. The final layer of this illusion is in Karlach's endings. None of them are what I believe any of us would consider very happy, but the game frames them as some sort of agency, despite the fact that none of them resemble the hope the game had spent so long on nurturing. And Karlach's endings, either it be to live in Avernus forever or to die on the docks, all make you realize that the game never promised her survival. It promised her choice, but choice does not mean escape. Sometimes it only means deciding how the suffering ends. But the game never makes you feel like the hope you had was ever a trick. It was real while it lasted, yet it's clear the game never intended to let that hope become permanent. It was always just temporary, just borrowed, and so when it all finally collapses, it feels like the slow and quiet realization that sometimes, even a world as magical as Faerun can't give you everything that you want. By the time Baldur's Gate 3 reaches its final act, the truth about Karlach's fate is no longer hidden from you. The infernal engine is reaching its boiling point, and every promise the game made you throughout its story, through the upgrades and the dialogue, all of them have quietly collapsed. So when the game finally presents Karlach with her endings, what they offer is not salvation, but negotiation. Now on paper, when you look at it, she is given options. Yet in reality, she is just given compromises that all demand the same thing, that she surrenders something fundamental to herself in exchange for survival. There is no outcome that exists where she's able to simply live. If Karlach chooses to return to Avernus, she does survive, that is of course undeniable. The hell that once consumed her now becomes the place that sustains her. With her infernal engine no longer overheating in its natural habitat, her body can finally stabilize. She can fight, she can endure, but to many of us it's clear that survival here is inseparable from exile. At the end of the day, Avernus is still Avernus. It's a sea of war and never-ending violence. It's a realm built on torment above all else with no sense of peace. The 10 years that she already lost do not transform into any victory. They simply extend into another lifetime of that same battlefield. To me, what makes this ending especially painful is the fact that Karlach herself doesn't frame it as a triumph. Even when she does accept it, the relief is never clean. There is a real sort of resignation beneath her courage. The game does allow her to face eternal war with defiance, but it never pretends that this is even close to the life that she so desperately wanted. She gets sent back to the one place that she never wanted to return to, because it's the only place that won't kill her. But the alternatives to this ending are not that much better either. If you let Karlach simply stay at the docks, she straight out dies. There's no poetic dialogue or some sort of magical transformation. Her engine burns out, her body fails, and she dies surrounded by the people that she fought alongside for so long. Yet even with such a dramatic conclusion, I think this is the ending that preserves her identity entirely. She remains herself to the very end, as she does not lose her body to hell or her mind to Ceramorphosis, but what she loses instead is time and any sort of future at all. What I find most interesting about this particular ending though is how it's not really framed as a heroic sacrifice or dramatic send-off. It's quiet and abrupt. Karlach doesn't inherently die as a legend, but she dies as a person whose body just couldn't keep up anymore. Then in addition to these two endings, there is the most drastic of them all. Under very specific circumstances in the game's final stretch, you have the choice to encourage Karlach to transform herself into a Mind Flayer instead of Orpheus. Now, as you would assume, mechanically this does resolve her engine problem, as her new body isn't exactly incompatible with the infernal machine inside of her. But here, the survival she is able to clutch onto comes at the cost of her very humanity, her physical form, and the identity that she fought so desperately to preserve to the very end. As you're all aware, the game is very clear about the true consequences of Ceramorphosis. Becoming a Mind Flayer isn't just a new shape, but for most, it's a new existence. Karlach's voice, her presence, and her emotional expressiveness are fundamentally altered if you decide to go on this path. And even where fragments of her personality may remain, they exist behind a form that is defined by its alien nature. Sure, the engine no longer kills her, but this comes at the cost of Karlach being herself. She's able to live on, but as something else entirely. When you take all of these three main endings for Karlach together, it paints quite a clear picture. A picture that shows Karlach was never given a true solution. Instead, she was only allowed to choose the form her loss takes. In Avernus, she loses her freedom. On the dock, she loses her future. And as a Mind Flayer, she loses herself. What I think makes these endings especially devastating is the fact that none of them feel at all deserved. Karlach never sought power, nor did she carve this path for herself through ambition and arrogance. Instead, she was sold, weaponized, and then discarded. Sure, the other companions in this game suffer just as much in many moments, but most of them are offered at least one ending that resembles some sort of normalcy or hope. Shadowheart can reclaim her past and be reborn. Gale can find absolution as a professor of magic. These characters in their journeys do bend towards resolution in one way or another, but Karlach's does not. It only bends towards suffering. I believe another reason we find this outcome so difficult to accept is that it's obvious to us all that Karlach herself never stops trying to live. Through it all, her optimism does not evaporate, and her refusal to collapse emotionally is not some sort of denial, but it's true and utter resistance that makes the inevitability of her fate feel even more unforgiving. To me, Karlach is not a tragic character because she lacks agency, because in many ways she doesn't. She's still able to make a choice on whether she decides to run, stay, or transform. But what this game ultimately reveals to you is that agency alone is not always enough. You can choose the direction you fall, but you can't always choose to stop falling. To this day, there is no ending in which Karlach can simply wake up in Faerun with the engine gone and her future intact. There's no path for her where her suffering is finally extinguished once and for all. Even her best outcomes all make her give up part of herself in order to endure. And to me, that is why she just can't win. It's not because she's weak or because she made the wrong decisions, but it's because her story is built around a kind of loss that can never be reversed, without undoing the very rules of the world that created it. Karlach's tragedy is not that she dies or loses herself, it's that she fights for life in a universe that never truly gave it to her in the first place. I think it's clear now that Karlach's story isn't tragic because of how it ends. It's tragic because of how long she keeps believing it might not. Every hope that Karlach holds is earned, but the world never truly gives her the one thing that she yearns for the most, a future that isn't borrowed. In the end, she doesn't lose because she gives up. She loses because some stories in Baldur's Gate 3 just aren't meant to be solved. Anyway, that's all from me for today's video. If you enjoyed, please consider subbing to the channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 and RPG content, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.